Seasons changed around the Crawford estate, but inside its grand walls, a quiet revolution had taken place. No longer was the estate merely a symbol of wealth and legacy. It had become a place of truth, of accountability, and most importantly, of healing. Elliot, once surrounded by polished deception, had built a new foundation of trust, not just in those around him, but in himself. His days no longer followed the strict rhythms of business meetings and social appearances. Now he woke up to purpose, not the kind measured by contracts or acquisitions, but the kind rooted in gratitude, in clarity, in redemption. Maya still woke early, long before the rest of the house stirred. Some habits had never left her. The quiet of the morning reminded her of who she was before everything changed. She would walk through the garden with a thermos of tea, stopping near the rose bushes that Claire had once planted. She often paused by the stone bench near the pond, where she once sat thinking no one would ever hear her voice. Now that same voice was being heard in rooms she once never dreamed of entering, but she had never let the attention change her, never let the applause distract her from what mattered. Her phone vibrated often now, not with social calls, but with messages from workers across the country, some as far away as small towns she couldn't pronounce. They shared stories of hardship, of injustice, and of courage sparked by her example. They asked not for rescue, but for someone who would simply listen. Maya read every message, sometimes late into the night, and responded when she could with encouragement, with resources, with reminders that they were not alone. Her days were full, not with tasks, but with meaning. The Crawford Foundation, now named the Claire and Evelyn Trust in honor of the two women who shaped Elliot and Maya's lives in ways neither could forget, had grown into a respected force, funding legal aid, healthcare support, and education for domestic workers and caregivers. Maya served as the head of the oversight board, and though she still preferred simple clothes and never sat at the head of the table, her presence commanded quiet respect. Her reports were detailed, her decisions thoughtful, and her questions always piercing, because she never stopped paying attention. Elliot, now years older and much healthier, often spoke publicly not about business, but about dignity. He had stepped down from several corporate boards to focus fully on advocacy, using his voice and resources to elevate those who had once been invisible in his world. He often told audiences, "I almost died not from poison, but from ignorance, and if not for Maya, I would never have woken up." His words carried weight not just because of who he was, but because of who he chose to stand beside. But despite all the recognition, Maya remained deeply connected to the past. She still visited her old neighborhood once a month, walked past the apartment where she grew up, placed flowers at Evelyn's grave, and sat at the diner where she had once waited tables with a dream too fragile to speak aloud. Sometimes she met girls who reminded her of herself, sharp-eyed, overworked, quietly observant, and she always left extra tips, along with a note that simply said, "Keep watching, keep listening, your moment will come." One day, a letter arrived at the estate, not typed but handwritten in looping cursive, no return address. Inside was a short message. "You may not remember me, but years ago I worked with Juliana under another name, in another city. I saw what she did to a patient who trusted her, but I was too scared to speak. Your story gave me the courage to report it to the authorities. I thought you should know. You saved more lives than you realize, Maya." Folded the letter gently, tucked it into her journal, and looked out the window. The sky was painted with soft oranges and purples, and the world felt wide and possible. It had only been a few weeks since Juliana had been removed from the estate, but the ripples of truth were spreading like fire through dry grass. What had once been confined to the quiet corridors of the Crawford estate was now making its way into courtrooms, newsrooms, and boardrooms across the city. Elliot, once known as a private and soft-spoken billionaire, had taken a step few expected. He came forward not just with his illness, but with the truth behind it, the betrayal, the poison, and most importantly, the courage of the woman who saved his life. It started with a single interview, carefully arranged by Elliot's longtime legal advisor, filmed in the library of his home, the same room where he once sat doubting Maya's warning, now repurposed into a place of reckoning. His voice was calm, aged slightly from recovery, but clear. And when he spoke the words, "I was being slowly poisoned by someone I trusted, and the only person who noticed, who dared to speak the truth, was my housekeeper." A silence fell over the city, not because they couldn't believe it, but because they could. and that realization hit harder than any scandal ever could. Media attention followed, of course, but Elliot refused to let it become a tabloid circus. Instead, he used the platform to talk about trust, about power, and about the unseen people who hold up the walls of every powerful house. He didn't mention Maya's name at first by her request, but word spread quickly among staff networks, among those in the service industry, in kitchens and laundry rooms, among women who had been ignored, dismissed, or punished for noticing too much. Maya had unknowingly become something more than a maid. She had become a symbol of resistance and quiet strength. But with exposure came danger, and not everyone was ready to see a woman like Maya in the spotlight. Threats began arriving at the estate. Written letters, strange calls, even one attempt to bribe a staff member to steal the medical reports. Elliot responded by tightening security, hiring a private investigation team and making it clear that any harm directed toward Maya would be treated as a direct attack on him. But still, Maya walked with her head down, not out of fear, but because she didn't want recognition, only justice. The legal case against Juliana escalated when the test results from the original silver tin came back. Confirmed presence of arsenic and a rare compound only available through high-level pharmaceutical access. Combined with the handwritten logs from Claire's final months, the evidence became overwhelming. Even more damning were financial records that revealed Juliana had funneled money into secret accounts, purchased offshore properties, and had a long history of aliases in multiple cities under different professions. Caregiver, nurse, even therapist, she had used care as her mask in every role. A grand jury was formed, and the district attorney prepared formal charges, not just attempted murder, but also fraud, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. Juliana's lawyers tried to argue mental instability, stress, and emotional imbalance caused by grief. But none of it could stand against the trail of carefully documented truth that Maya had uncovered. And when Thomas finally agreed to testify, revealing what he had seen during Claire's final weeks, the case transformed from circumstantial suspicion to undeniable reality. But the courtroom was not where the real change happened. The real change was quiet, invisible to most, but powerful in its own right. It happened when other housekeepers began speaking up about mistreatment, when nurses in private homes requested third-party oversight, when a single mother who cleaned offices overnight took her employer to court for wrongful dismissal, inspired by a maid she saw on the evening news. It happened when Elliot established a foundation in Claire's name to fund legal aid for domestic workers and caregivers across the country, and when he asked Maya to lead the committee that would review every case. At first, Maya declined politely, unsure of her place in that world, but Elliot looked at her and said the one thing that no one had ever told her so directly: "Your courage saved my life, but your voice might save 1,000 more." And slowly, she stepped into the role, not because she wanted power, but because she understood its value when used right. She never changed her tone or her style, never began dressing like a CEO or speaking like a politician. She remained soft-spoken, thoughtful, observant, and that's why people trusted her, because she had nothing to gain and everything to protect. She spent her days reviewing letters, listening to stories from women and men who had worked in silence for years. She sat with them, cried with them, helped them build cases, and more than once traveled in person to attend hearings where she simply sat in the back row, reminding them that someone believed them. Meanwhile, Elliot continued to heal, not just physically but spiritually. He sold the vacation mansion he once planned with Juliana, donated its proceeds to hospitals that cared for underpaid nurses, and restructured his company to include labor protection initiatives. For the first time in years, his board meetings didn't begin with profit charts, but with updates on the foundation's progress. But, even as the world turned toward the future, Maya remained grounded in the past, not haunted, but deeply aware of what had been lost. She still kept Evelyn's photo by her bedside, still wore the same shoes she'd bought during her first week at the estate, and still refused interviews that painted her as a hero. She didn't see herself as one. She saw herself as a woman who had been given a choice, to stay silent or to stand up. And she chose the harder path. One afternoon, as she walked through the estate gardens, a little girl ran past her, laughing, followed by her mother. A new maid who had just joined the staff, Maya smiled and helped the girl tie her shoelace. The mother whispered, "Thank you for everything you've done. You've given women like me the courage to speak." And Maya simply nodded, offering a small smile, because she understood now that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it moved like wind, quiet, invisible, but strong enough to bend even the tallest trees. And though Juliana now sat behind prison walls awaiting sentencing, Maya knew the real victory wasn't in the verdict. It was in the lives changed by the truth that had once nearly been buried. Because when truth becomes power, even the smallest voice can shake the tallest mansion, and Maya's voice, once ignored, had become impossible to silence. It had only been a few weeks since Juliana had been removed from the estate, but the ripples of truth were spreading like fire through dry grass. What had once been confined to the quiet corridors of the Crawford estate was now making its way into courtrooms, newsrooms, and boardrooms across the city. Elliot, once known as a private and soft-spoken billionaire, had taken a step few expected. He came forward not just with his illness, but with the truth behind it, the betrayal, the poison, and most importantly, the courage of the woman who saved his life. It started with a single interview, carefully arranged by Elliot's longtime legal advisor, filmed in the library of his home, the same room where he once sat doubting Maya's warning, now repurposed into a place of reckoning. His voice was calm, aged slightly from recovery, but clear. And when he spoke the words, "I was being slowly poisoned by someone I trusted, and the only person who noticed, who dared to speak the truth, was my housekeeper." A silence fell over the city, not because they couldn't believe it, but because they could, and that realization hit harder than any scandal ever could. Media attention followed, of course, but Elliot refused to let it become a tabloid circus. Instead, he used the platform to talk about trust, about power, and about the unseen people who hold up the walls of every powerful house. He didn't mention Maya's name at first by her request, but word spread quickly among staff networks, among those in the service industry, in kitchens and laundry rooms, among women who had been ignored, dismissed, or punished for noticing too much. Maya had unknowingly become something more than a maid. She had become a symbol of resistance and quiet strength. But with exposure came danger, and not everyone was ready to see a woman like Maya in the spotlight. Threats began arriving at the estate. Written letters, strange calls, even one attempt to bribe a staff member to steal the medical reports. Elliot responded by tightening security, hiring a private investigation team, and making it clear that any harm directed toward Maya would be treated as a direct attack on him. But still, Maya walked with her head down, not out of fear, but because she didn't want recognition, only justice. The legal case against Juliana escalated when the test results from the original silver tin came back. Confirmed presence of arsenic and a rare compound only available through high-level pharmaceutical access, combined with the handwritten logs from Claire's final months, the evidence became overwhelming. Even more damning were financial records that revealed Juliana had funneled money into secret accounts, purchased offshore properties, and had a long history of aliases in multiple cities under different professions. Caregiver, nurse, even therapist, she had used care as her mask in every role. A grand jury was formed, and the district attorney prepared formal charges, not just attempted murder, but also fraud, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. Juliana's lawyers tried to argue mental instability, stress, and emotional imbalance caused by grief. But none of it could stand against the trail of carefully documented truth that Maya had uncovered. And when Thomas finally agreed to testify, revealing what he had seen during Claire's final weeks, the case transformed from circumstantial suspicion to undeniable reality. But the courtroom was not where the real change happened. Long before Maya ever stepped through the marble entrance of the Crawford estate, long before she wore her first pressed apron or balanced a tray of porcelain dishes across her steady arms, she had already learned how to survive in silence. Her story didn't begin in a mansion, but in a small, one-bedroom apartment with cracked ceilings and flickering lights in the west end of the city. It was a place where dreams struggled to grow, where mothers worked 2 jobs and still came home with tired eyes, and where girls like Maya learned early that strength had nothing to do with loudness and everything to do with endurance. She was raised by her grandmother, Evelyn, a housekeeper who worked in old colonial homes filled with people who never learned her name. but who never forgot to demand perfection. Maya used to wait on the front porch of their modest apartment, her small fingers clutching the railing as the sky darkened, watching for Evelyn's figure to appear down the street. Some nights she came home limping, her shoes soaked from rain, her knuckles raw from scrubbing marble floors. But she always smiled, always brought back a story about a broken vase, a snooty dinner guest, or a child who'd drawn her a picture in secret. Evelyn never complained, never cursed the people she worked for. She just kept going, and Maya absorbed every lesson like sunlight in winter. But not every chapter in Maya's early life was shaped by quiet strength. Some were carved by pain, sharp and unforgettable. When Maya was just 11, her mother returned after years of absence, addicted, angry, and desperate. At first, Maya felt hope, the kind only a child can feel when she sees her mother's eyes for the first time in years. But that hope didn't last. Her mother brought with her chaos. Loud arguments, broken furniture, and nights filled with shouting and slamming doors. One night, Maya watched Fa roam the hallway as her mother sold Evelyn's old gold locket to a stranger for a handful of crumpled bills. The next morning, Evelyn simply said, "Some people are born to teach you what not to become," and went back to preparing breakfast as if her heart hadn't been shattered. After that, Maya made herself a promise. She would never let someone else's cruelty silence her voice again, not even if the world refused to listen. By the time she was 16, she was cleaning houses alongside her grandmother, learning how to fold sheets with military precision and how to sense danger from the way a man's eyes lingered too long. She saw how invisible people like her were, how easily their presence was ignored, but how deeply their absence was felt when floors went unpolished and plates remained dirty. She learned the art of blending into the background, but she never stopped observing, never stopped thinking, and most importantly, never stopped recording the truth, even if only in her own mind. Evelyn passed away the winter Maya turned 19, a heart attack while sweeping the steps of a townhouse she could never afford to live in. Maya buried her with her own savings and walked back to the bus stop alone. The world hadn't noticed her loss, but to Maya, it was the end of her universe. For a while, she drifted between jobs, cleaning motels, answering phones, working night shifts at diners, but nothing lasted, until one day, a wealthy widow named Claire Crawford walked into a cafe where Maya served coffee, and everything changed. Claire had grace, not the rehearsed kind, but the kind that made even the grumpiest customer pause to listen. She wore pearls without arrogance and thanked waiters like they were old friends. When she noticed Maya's attention to detail, the way she wiped down the counter twice even after it looked clean, she asked her one simple question: "Have you ever worked in a private home?" Maya hesitated but answered honestly, and Claire offered her a job the next day. Maya looked at Thomas stunned. "She worked here before?" Thomas nodded slowly. "She was hired as a private nurse for Claire's recovery after her surgery. Temporary. No one thought much of it back then. She was quiet, respectful, professional." His voice cracked. "But after Claire passed in that accident, Juliana disappeared for a while, only to return months later as a chance encounter that turned into courtship." Maya felt cold all over. Her skin tingled with dread. "You think Claire was—" Thomas held up his hand gently. "I don't know. I have no proof, just suspicions. But Claire never fully recovered from her surgery, and the night before the crash she called me, said she felt strange, like something wasn't right." Everything started spinning inside Maya's mind. This wasn't just a story of a jealous second wife. This was deeper, more sinister, more methodical. Juliana hadn't just married Elliot for status or wealth. She had inserted herself into his life step by step, patiently, strategically. And perhaps she had started her plan long before anyone noticed. Maya knew she had to act again, to understand what happened behind those locked doors years ago when Claire was dying and Juliana was there every day, silently watching, learning, and possibly manipulating. She made her way to the old storage basement that hadn't been used since Claire's passing. It had been sealed off, filled with unused medical equipment, old linens, and broken furniture. With Thomas's help, she opened the rusty door and stepped inside. Dust floated in the air like forgotten memories, and the smell of mold and time clung to the walls. They spent hours digging through cabinets, boxes, and drawers, looking for anything that might explain what had really happened to Claire. At first, it felt like searching for meaning in a sea of junk, until Maya opened a small wooden box wrapped in plastic. Sheets inside were medical logs, handwritten by Juliana. The logs detailed every medication, every dosage, and every reaction Claire had during her final months. But something stood out. There were entries that mentioned symptoms Claire never reported to anyone else, symptoms that mirrored the ones Elliot had experienced recently, the same weakness, same stomach issues, same gradual decline, and even worse, some of the entries listed drugs that had already been pulled from the market years ago due to severe side effects, medications that were supposed to be discarded, yet were documented here as used regularly. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She felt a mixture of horror and heartbreak. Claire hadn't died from an accident. She had been fading long before that, and Juliana had been there every step of the way, smiling, hiding, planning. She took the box and the logs straight to Elliot, her hands shaking as she placed them on his desk. He looked up from his chair, still frail but stronger than before, and when she told him everything, she watched as the truth settled into his soul like a storm cloud finally pouring rain. For the first time, Elliot cried openly in front of her, not just from sorrow, but from guilt, shame, and the realization that he had ignored the signs for years, had silenced his doubts, and had trusted the very person who had likely orchestrated the two worst declines in his life. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, his voice barely holding together. Maya sat beside him, gently placing her hand over his. "Because you loved her," she said. "And people like Juliana, they know how to use love as a weapon." The next few days became a storm of legal calls, private investigators, and quiet security movements around the estate. Juliana had been released from police custody due to lack of immediate criminal evidence, but now that the log and timeline were being re-examined, but Elliot wasn't listening anymore. He pressed the bell for security, and as guards entered the room, the energy shifted. Juliana screamed in protest, but Elliot stood, his frame weak but steady, and pointed at her with a trembling hand. "Until this is investigated, you are not to prepare or serve any food in this house," he said, "and you are not to come near me." As Juliana was escorted out of the room, her voice echoing in rage and disbelief, Maya stood in stunned silence, her heart pounding. Elliot turned to her slowly, his eyes softer now, filled with regret. "Why didn't I listen to you sooner?" he asked quietly. Maya didn't answer. She just exhaled for the first time in days, but deep inside she knew this wasn't the end, this was just the beginning, because poison wasn't the only secret hidden inside the walls of the Crawford estate. The days following Juliana's removal from the estate were tense, but not in the same way as before. The air was no longer heavy with silent danger, yet a thick fog of confusion lingered over the staff and especially around Elliot. Though the poison had been exposed, though the white powder had been confirmed and taken away for further testing, and though Juliana had been escorted out in front of everyone, something still felt unfinished to Maya, and deep in her gut, she knew that what they had uncovered was only the surface of a deeper, darker truth, one that had begun long before she ever noticed the silver tin or the sudden collapses. Elliot spent most of his time in his study now, under medical supervision, away from the kitchens and away from Juliana. Though his body had started to recover slowly with the meals now monitored and prepared under strict care, his spirit remained hollowed out, as if drained not only by the poison, but by the betrayal, the disbelief that the woman he had once trusted, adored, and even planned a new future with had been capable of such a calculated attack. But Maya had learned that betrayal rarely began overnight. It grew slowly, like mold behind polished walls, and that's why she couldn't sleep at night. Not yet, because something didn't add up, something she couldn't name, but felt everywhere around her. One evening, as she sat in the staff quarters staring blankly at her chipped tea mug, Thomas entered quietly and closed the door behind him. In his hand was a folder, old, faded, and unmarked. He handed it to Maya without a word, then sat beside her, resting his tired hands on his knees. "These belong to Claire," he said finally, "Elliot's first wife. I found them in a cabinet years ago, hidden behind old medical records, never told anyone. But now I think you should see them." Maya opened the folder carefully. Inside were letters, receipts, and hospital notes, all with Claire's name on them. At first they seemed harmless. Lists of medications, dietary changes, routine prescriptions for migraines, but then came the inconsistencies. Some prescriptions were dated the same week Claire had supposedly been overseas. Others bore a doctor's signature she recognized as belonging to a clinic in another city entirely. Maya's heart sank deeper with every page. It was clear now. Claire had been sick long before her accident, and no one had known, or maybe someone had known and chosen to keep it quiet. Thomas tapped one photo that had been paperclipped to a document. It showed Claire sitting up in bed, looking pale, holding Elliot's hand, but next to her, barely noticeable, stood Juliana, wearing a nurse's badge. He didn't recognize it, but she knew sugar when she saw it. And this wasn't sugar. She replaced the tin carefully and pulled out her phone, snapping a few photos as quietly as she could, her hands sweating as she slid the tin back into place. Later that night, she approached Thomas the butler again, her voice low, her eyes pleading. She showed him the photo and whispered, "Please, just tell me if you've ever seen anything like this." Thomas stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked over his shoulder before nodding slowly. "Yes," he said. "That tin is hers, always tucked away like a secret." Maya's breath caught. "Do you know what it is?" Thomas hesitated. "No, but I've seen her add something to his soup before, and once she scolded the cook for using the wrong pot." He looked away ashamed. "I should have spoken up, but like I said, I've got people depending on me." Maya put a hand on his arm. "I understand, but if we don't act now, it might be too late." Thomas nodded, guilt and fear shadowing his face. "I'll help how I can. Just tell me what you need." The next morning, Maya stood by the service gate as the grocery delivery truck arrived. She slipped outside for a minute and approached the driver, a man named Roy who'd been delivering to the estate for years. "Can I ask you for a favor?" she whispered, glancing around. Roy shrugged. "Sure, what's up?" She handed him a small Ziploc bag with a white tissue sealed inside. "This might sound strange, but can you get this tested for me? Don't ask questions, just, please." Roy raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I've got a cousin who works in a lab. I'll see what I can do." The waiting began. 2 long days filled with tension and growing danger. Juliana had become colder toward Maya, offering false smiles and sharp glances. She began assigning Maya trivial tasks far from the main kitchen, keeping her away from Elio. It's meals. But Maya still managed to sneak looks, still watched how Elliot barely ate now, how his hands shook slightly as he tried to write, how his eyes seemed duller, as if the light inside him was slowly fading. On the 3rd day, just after noon, Roy returned with a paper envelope, sealed and folded tightly. He didn't say a word, just handed it over and drove away. Maya rushed to the staff bathroom and locked the door. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. The words were typed on official letterhead, and even with her limited understanding of scientific terms, she recognized what it meant. Arsenic. Not a large dose, but repeated exposure. Consistent. Enough to damage organs slowly over time without immediate death. Enough to be passed off as illness unless someone was looking. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from fear, but from relief. She had proof. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't making it up. She tucked the paper into her apron and walked straight toward the drawing room where Elliot sat half awake in a velvet chair. Juliana was perched nearby, reading a book aloud as if playing the perfect wife. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped between them, ignoring Juliana's icy stare, and handed the paper directly to Elliot. "Please read this, sir," she said firmly. "It's about what's been happening to you." Juliana rose instantly, trying to snatch the paper. "Maya, how dare you?" "Let him read it," Maya snapped, louder than she'd ever spoken in that house before. "He deserves to know the truth." Elliot unfolded the paper with slow, shaky hands. His eyes moved across the words, and for the first time in weeks, something changed in his expression. Not confusion, not dismissal, but horror. He looked up at Juliana, and her mask cracked. "What is this?" he asked, voice hoarse. "She's lying," Juliana cried. "She forged that. She's obsessed with me, jealous, trying to turn you against me." The rest of the day passed like a slow nightmare. No one believed her. The other staff avoided eye contact. Some whispered that she was trying to ruin the boss's marriage. Others said she was jealous of Juliana. Only an old butler named Thomas, who had been working there since Elliot's father ran the estate, pulled her aside late that night. "You're not wrong," he said in a low voice. "I've seen strange things too, but no one listens to us. They listen to money and beauty." Then help me, Maya begged. We have to do something. I can't, he said sadly. I have a granddaughter with medical bills and this job keeps her alive. That night, Maya sat on her bed, holding her mother's photo, tears running down her cheeks. Her heart screamed in frustration. She had tried to do the right thing, but the world wasn't built for women like her to win battles like this. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. Elliot didn't show up for breakfast, then he didn't come down for lunch. By afternoon, the doctor had been called in, and Juliana stood outside his room, pretending to cry, wiping invisible tears from her flawless face. She told the staff he had a severe flu, possibly a reaction to medication. She even offered to double the kitchen cleaning to avoid contamination. But Maya knew it was all a performance, and inside that room, Elliot was slipping further away. She had no proof, no authority, and no allies. But she had one thing left, hope. That night, as rain tapped gently on the windows of the staff quarters, Maya made a choice that would change everything. She would gather evidence, real, undeniable proof, something no one could ignore, not even Elliot. She didn't know how yet, but she knew she had to try, because the truth was real, and it was worth fighting for, even if no one believed her yet. The house grew quieter after Elliot's sudden illness, though life inside Crawford Estates had always moved with controlled elegance. Now it was like walking through a museum, polished but lifeless. The staff whispered less, walked softer, and glanced nervously toward the east wing where Elliot lay bedridden. Maya moved through the halls with a heavy heart, pretending to follow her daily chores. But inside her mind was a storm of worry, fear, and determination. She knew time was slipping through her fingers like sand, and with each hour, Elliot was growing weaker under Juliana's watchful eye. She had decided she would find evidence, something so solid, so undeniable, that even the most polished lies couldn't erase it. But that was easier said than done. Juliana had grown more guarded, more suspicious. She had locked the pantry, limited kitchen access, and insisted on preparing all of Elliot's meals herself, under the pretense of keeping his diet precisely managed. Every corner of the estate had become a stage for Juliana's performance of concern and devotion, and most of the staff applauded her for it. Only Maya saw through the cracks, but Maya wasn't reckless. She knew she had to be smart, careful, and invisible, so she began her search in the quietest places at the quietest times while others rested or chatted. She studied routines, timed Juliana's comings and goings, mapped out where she stored things, and memorized the sound of her heels against the hardwood floors. Late one evening, long after dinner had been served and Juliana had retreated to her room with a glass of wine, Maya slipped into the lower pantry. The door creaked faintly, and her heart pounded in response, but no one came. The room smelled of spices and aged wood, shelves lined with olive oils, sauces, and canned goods. It was there on the second shelf behind a row of honey jars that she found a small silver tin, exactly like the one she had seen in Juliana's hand days ago. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The lid came off easily. Inside was a white powder so fine it clung to the edges like smoke. Maya didn't sleep that night. Her heart was heavy, her mind tangled in thoughts she couldn't silence. Over the years, she had learned to keep her head down, to stay invisible in a world that didn't always value truth from people like her. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about rules or rank or protocol. She was thinking about Mr. Elliot, the man who once offered her mother free treatment during her cancer battle, the man who cried alone for weeks after Claire died, the man who used to walk through the house humming old jazz tunes. And now that man was being slowly destroyed from within, and Maya was the only one who seemed to notice. The next morning, the house was buzzing as usual. The chef barked instructions, gardeners moved through the side path, and Juliana, dressed in a stunning silk dress, descended the grand staircase like she was born into money. But Maya noticed something new, something small, yet chilling. Juliana had started locking the pantry, claiming house security, and the medicine cabinet had been moved into her private room. When Maya asked where the pain relievers were for the staff, Juliana's smile was polite, but her eyes were sharp. From now on, she said, all medicines are to be signed out through me. Maya knew then that she had to act. Waiting any longer could cost Elliot his life, so she chose the one moment in the day when she might be heard. Breakfast, Elliot always ate in the sunroom at 8 a.m., with the sunlight warming the glass table and the soft hum of classical music in the background. He liked peace in the morning, and Maya hoped that peace would help him listen. As he picked up his spoon, Maya stepped forward and placed both hands firmly on the table. The spoon froze in his hand, and the music suddenly felt too loud. "Please don't eat that, Mr. Elliot," she said, her voice trembling but strong. He looked up, confusion crossing his tired face. "Maya?" he asked gently. "Is everything all right?" "No, sir," she said. I have to tell you something, and I'm begging you to listen without interrupting." He placed the spoon down, folded his hands, and nodded once, the way a father might when his child finally gathered courage to speak a difficult truth. Maya took a deep breath and told him everything. She told him how she had watched him fall sick more often after Juliana began preparing his meals, how she had noticed the powder from the silver tin, how the symptoms he described, fatigue, vomiting, stomach cramps, matched low-dose poisoning signs. She explained that she'd been tracking it quietly, comparing the days, the meals, the changes in behavior. She wasn't accusing blindly, she was pleading. For a long moment, Elliot didn't speak. The classical music played on, soft violins drifting like ghosts in the sunlit silence. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "Maya," he said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but this is a serious accusation." His words hit her like ice water, not because they were harsh, but because they were careful, diplomatic. It meant he didn't believe her, not yet. "You think I'd lie about this?" she whispered, her hands still trembling. "No," he said, "but I think you're under a lot of stress, maybe seeing things that aren't there." Before Maya could reply, Juliana entered the room with a smile so wide it could slice glass. "Good morning, my love," she said, placing a kiss on Elliot's cheek, then glanced at Maya with a sugary voice. "Maya, shouldn't you be polishing the mirrors today?" Maya felt a surge of helplessness rise in her chest. She opened her mouth to argue, to scream the truth, but Elliot had already returned his gaze to his meal, lifting the spoon once more, and she turned and walked away. The morning sun rose gently over the sprawling Crawford estate, casting soft golden light across the dew-covered grass. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but inside that mansion something was not right. Maya Williams had worked at the Crawford estate for 7 years. She wasn't just a maid. She was the one who kept everything running when others failed. She was quiet, kind, and always paid attention, even when people thought she didn't. Today felt like any other day. But in her heart, Maya knew something was wrong. Mr. Elliot Crawford, the billionaire who had once been strong and commanding, was growing weaker every week. He looked thinner, tired, and more distant. It wasn't age, no. He was only in his early 50s, fit and careful with his health. But something, or someone, was slowly draining the life from him, and it always happened after his meals. Maya had seen it again last night. Elliot had eaten dinner prepared by his new wife, Juliana, and within hours, he was curled up on the couch, pale and sweating, clutching his stomach. He dismissed it like always, blaming stress, work, or bad sleep. But Maya wasn't convinced. She remembered Elliot before Juliana, back when his late wife Claire was alive. He was healthy, happy, even joyful at times. Claire had died in a tragic car accident, and within a year, Juliana appeared, elegant, charming, and mysterious. She was younger, maybe by 20 years, and everyone in the house whispered about her, but no one dared say anything loud enough for Elliot to hear. Not even Maya. Until now, in the grand kitchen, Maya quietly prepared the breakfast table. She moved with care, placing the fresh orange juice near the left-hand corner, just the way Elliot liked it. Beside her, the chef stirred scrambled eggs, and Juliana walked in wearing a silk robe, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses, even though they were indoors. "Good morning," Juliana said, her voice sweet like honey but cold underneath. She reached for the tray with Elliot's breakfast. "I'll take this to him today. He didn't sleep well." Maya froze. "She always delivered breakfast, Mrs. Juliana," Maya said softly. "Would you like me to?" "No need," Juliana cut her off, her smile tight. "Go clean the upstairs hallway, the one with the antique paintings." Maya nodded slowly and walked away, but she didn't go upstairs. She waited behind the corner, out of sight, watching. Juliana placed something on the eggs, a small sprinkle of white powder from a silver tin hidden beneath her robe. It was fast, practiced, and almost invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't salt. It wasn't sugar. Something was terribly wrong. She waited until Juliana left the room with the tray, then walked straight to the drawer where the tin had been placed. But it was gone. Maya felt dizzy, unsure of what she had just witnessed. But deep in her bones, she knew this wasn't the first time it had happened. She had to be sure. The rest of the day, Maya kept her distance, but she watched everything. She watched Elliot eat. She saw how he smiled at Juliana with tired eyes, how he told her the food was delicious, how he slowly grew quieter as the morning went on, and by noon, he was in bed, complaining of headaches and nausea, just like every day. Later that evening, Maya walked into the staff quarters and pulled out an old notebook from her drawer. Inside it were dates, times, and notes. Every time Elliot had fallen ill after a meal cooked or served by Juliana, Maya had written it all down, not knowing why, just sensing something wasn't right. But now the pattern was clear. The only question was, what could she do about it? She was just a maid. If she accused Juliana, she'd be fired, maybe worse. And Juliana was clever. She knew how to smile in public, how to act kind, how to make others look crazy. But even with the victories, not all wounds healed easily. Juliana was now serving a lengthy prison sentence after being convicted on multiple counts. And though justice had been served in court, Maya knew that some damage couldn't be reversed. Claire was gone, and Elliot still woke on some nights gripped by guilt over the years he had let Juliana into their lives. Maya, too, carried her share of regret, not for what she had done, but for how long it had taken her to trust her instincts, to believe in her voice. She had learned that sometimes the hardest battle isn't against others, it's against silence, especially the kind that feels safe. As the estate entered the third year of transformation, with new staff trained under ethical policies, wellness programs for domestic employees, and open lines of communication, Maya quietly stepped back from daily operations, not to disappear, but to make space for others to rise. She trained a new generation of leaders, mostly women from underrepresented backgrounds, teaching them not only about policies and procedures, but about courage, resilience, and the unshakable power of observation. And then, one quiet morning, as she walked along the stone path that led to the greenhouse, a small girl ran up to her holding a toy stethoscope. The child looked up with bright eyes and asked, "Miss Maya, were you really the one who saved Mr. Elliot from the bad lady?" Maya crouched down, smiled gently, and replied, "I didn't save him alone, sweetheart. I just noticed what others didn't." The girl nodded solemnly. "I want to notice things too," and ran back to her mother, who stood smiling in the distance. Maya stood there for a moment, the sun warming her shoulders, and realized something deep and quiet. This was her legacy, not the articles, not the foundation, not even the court case, but the shift in the next generation, the reminder that even in silence there is power, even in the smallest voices there is strength. She had not been born into influence, had not studied in marble halls or dined with the powerful, but she had paid attention. She had listened, and in the end, that had changed everything. She walked on slowly, the wind brushing through the trees, the sound of birds in the distance, and the world felt peaceful, not because it was perfect, but because it was finally honest. And Maya, the maid who once stood trembling in a doorway begging a man not to eat his soup, had become the quiet storm that shook the very foundation of a broken system, not through violence, not through force, but by always listening and never walking away.